Until next time, December 7, 2025, we are in the fourth year and day 287 since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Welcome, I greet you, to the Daily Situation Report. Have a nice second. Advent. We're again donating for wounded transporters. As before, we in Ukraine for Berlin will collect donations for wounded transporters. Usually one transporter saves up to 100 lives. And in the past, we've already managed to provide a dozen of them, which are still actively in service. And that's all across Ukraine. We want to save lives, not destroy them. So this special Christmas donation comes at the perfect time, especially now. As before, the highest individual donation will be rewarded with a signed war and tactic flag. The donation goes directly to the nonprofit Ukraine for Berlin and is tax deductible. The link to it is, as always, right at the top of the video description. By the way, we would have had the Lega live stream today, just like every first Sunday of the month, but I have to postpone it shortly before Christmas because it's just not possible time-wise today. Dear viewers, the next defenestration could be imminent. Former Russian ground forces Commander-in-Chief Vladimir Churkin openly admitted to early war mistakes after speaking with broadcaster Rosbusiness Consulting. They traditionally underestimated Ukraine and overestimated their own forces. Military leaders received inaccurate reports and believed most Ukrainians would back Russia if an invasion occurred. Churkin also criticized the intelligence services, spoke of a lack of preparation for the war, and recalled the initial expectation that the campaign would be over in a few days. As an explanation, he mentioned a deceptive typhus syndrome from the short war after Georgia. At the same time, he indicated that the actual losses of dead and wounded in Russia are not present. The communalists began the magic strike. Since steam flies and sete, the provided by secret services. Wishful thinking, not reliable clarification. The leadership expected passive resistance, a short duration of operations and low-owned casualties. This led to insufficient force deployment, a lack of operational reserves, unrealistic marching objectives, inadequate logistics planning, and a command structure that collapsed under real-time pressure. The effects remain today. Russia uses quantity over quality to offset operational weaknesses. The army loses troops in urban combat and drone or artillery kill zones due to a lack of combined arms capability. The information space remains uncertain. Many commanders cannot rely on the information from their officers, and the general staff can no longer rely on the information from the commanders anyway. Losses are concealed and misjudgments are ignored. So his admission is the structural uncertainty. A system that punishes bad news systematically produces bad decisions. For this operation, tactical successes are meaningless without structural changes. Without strong reconnaissance, realistic planning, reserves, rotations, proper ammunition, and honest loss management, advances stay costly and short-lived. This applies in Pokrovsk as well as Liman and Piel. For Churkin, the interview will definitely have consequences. The regime only tolerates criticism if it benefits the system, meaning criticism against others. In this case, possible consequences include a coordinated undermining of his credibility, a subsequent disciplinary procedure, or simply his quiet disappearance from the public eye, up to and including a sudden and completely mysterious fall from a window. Of course, it's also possible to use him as a scapegoat in order to dismiss active decision makers who have already come under criticism from other bloggers. As we've seen, falling out of a window is actually a realistic scenario. And while we're on the subject, there's another complaint video again. Russian Category D soldiers like Delta filmed themselves at a supply depot before the next attack. They're carrying crutches and don't really look motivated, since they're also complaining about a genocide within the Russian army, specifically one that's targeted at them. What is Category D? Category A, for example, is similar to what the German army has. Category T1 means someone who is fully fit without any restrictions and can be used in any unit, even in elite units. Category B is similar to our T2, fit for service with minor restrictions, such as mild scoliosis or flat feet. Then there's also Category 5 for people who have minor limitations and would normally be discharged in peacetime, but are considered fit enough for the reserves. They remain fit for service during wartime. Then there's also Category G. These are people who are temporarily unfit for service. That means, for example, if you just broke your leg while you were being examined, and if it's clear that it will heal well, then you'll be deferred for a limited time until you're examined again. And then you can move up to one of the other categories again. And then there's also Category D. For permanently unfit, you could remember it that way. So invalid personnel, they actually have a full exemption from military service and mobilization. Due to serious illnesses like cancer, schizophrenia, epilepsy, human immunodeficiency, virus, vascular diseases, or just because they can't walk anymore, like most of these colleagues. Exactly. People are being used up again because each of them can attract a Ukrainian drone. Thus, the chances for a healthy one, and that's still cheaper than sending them back home and having them receive money from the state because they're disabled. Always remember what it's like over there. Remember how the Russian army treats its soldiers. Every real pro-Russian watching this, and I know there are some here, should rather hope that this war ends as soon as possible before Putin lets even more of his countrymen be sacrificed for a few meters of land. And anyone here who would rather wave the white flag during a Russian attack and prefers to live under an occupation will suffer the same fate in the next war of aggression. From their perspective, we are still valued less than their own people. We also see this with the foreign brigades and the North Koreans, who have been used up even more than their own people. As harsh as it may sound, but you just have to face this reality. And that's not something, no matter how unpleasant it may sound, that you can just ignore. At Piel, the Russians are increasing their advance. So the battle for the Megan is entering the next round, and Piel has already fallen for some time. The town has been partially surrounded for weeks since the last Russian pincer movement. However, I'm still missing some geolocations in the town, so I could redraw the yellow-marked area here in Piel in red, where there were gains. On the Russian side, there are forces here and there. Most notably, the 169th is here. An assault brigade is involved and aims to advance toward Liman. That's why I believe Piel has already fallen. It wouldn't make sense for them to bypass the village and attack across open fields if Ukrainian soldiers here could still disrupt their advance. That's why, as I said, I assume that the place has fallen. But I usually only mark things once they've actually been confirmed. And here on the Ukrainian side, we see the 115th and the 53rd and 63rd Mechanized Rifle Brigade, and of course also two Territorial Defense Brigades. In this case, the 120th and the 119th. And yes, the 119th. Yes, they've been defending here in Liman for quite some time now. That means the Ukrainians have reinforced compared to the last time we looked at this place a week ago, which is of course very important for them, because this place must not fall into urban house-to-house fighting. That would be very bad for the Ukrainians. Then they would need new forces again. They would need a lot of logistical efforts and exertion here to stop the Russian attack. Meanwhile, they're still fighting at Pokrovsk, Huliapol, or Monorad, which also ties up their forces. That means for the Ukrainians, it would be best if this battle here at Liman takes place only after the battle at Pokrovsk, because then they could redistribute their forces. Zweites Deutsches Fernsehen. The blogger under the name Kriegforscher reports once again that at the end of November, 2 rare BTR-70M and 1 BTR-82A were destroyed in his area of responsibility. According to him, the Russians used the miserable weather for an advance but lost their orientation in the process. In the battle, his unit destroyed a tank and disabled 6 assault troops. That's interesting as we again see mechanized forces on the battlefield. The Russians added improvised roof protection to block top attack strikes, which isn't bad. However, every other side of the vehicle was left exposed. That might be possible with a tank since it has thicker armor, but not with a BTR. The problem with the new BTRs, like the 82, is simply that the armor can often be penetrated even by a heavy machine gun. Off the top of my head, I think it had 16mm at its thickest point. Of course, that will never stop a drone, which is why it's reckless not to reinforce the other sides. But maybe they didn't have enough material, or they felt safe enough behind the relatively thin armor. Russian media are again reporting a hit on the substation in Belgorod. Apparently, there was a heavy bomb accidentally dropped with about 500 kg of explosives that hit the building. As a result, the power went out in the city center. Residents report that there was no air raid alarm. Only the roar of a jet could be heard shortly before the explosion. To my knowledge, the Ukrainians also didn't conduct an airstrike here. It would also be unlikely that they would fly a jet into the well-covered city of Belgorod. Everything so far suggests Russian-friendly fire. These incidents have risen for months, especially in Belgorod, where fighter jets often use glide bombs far from the front, and there are repeated accidental drops on their own villages. If this was another case, it's the 7th or 8th in the past 15 months. Remnants of rockets or malfunctions of other weapons have also been documented there several times already, so the pattern is known. Rushing operations, dense deployments, and ammo issues often cause friendly fire in urban areas. Similarly, in Russia, seriously injured veterans are targeted by real estate scammers once they get their insurance. Compensation payments to invest in an apartment. The case of 23-year-old Roman, who lost limbs in the war of aggression against Ukraine, shows the perfidious grandma model, as they call it. An apartment is sold even though it is legally tied to an elderly owner, and relatives can later contest the purchase. Buyers like Roman risk losing both their apartments and money. His case is ongoing, but similar disputes rarely end in favor of the victims. The outcome is doubly cynical. A young, severely injured soldier, whom the state markets as a hero, is at risk of being left without a home and without compensation. A system of greed, loopholes, real estate law, and weak victim protection exploits him without consequence. Imagine that. For a long time, I believe florists benefited most from the war of aggression, or the women who always marry someone right before they're mobilized or before they volunteer for the war, then wait for the money and then just marry the next person who wants to sign up for the special operation. But it seems there are many other niches where it's just as profitable. Special thanks to Algo crew members and Lieutenant Colonel Renike. As always, thank you for listening. Feel free to leave me a subscription, a like, and a comment, and see you in the next Situation Report.